Good morning and welcome to today's session, B2B media spend that performs, how to maximise pipeline and cut waste in 2026. And I am delighted to be joined today by Stuart Toll, who is Head of Media at the Croc, an award-winning B2B marketing agency with a large and diverse range of global B2B clients. So Stuart, you yourself have got 20 years experience in performance marketing across both B2B and B2C, and a real track record in building really strong high performance media campaigns. You actually built out your career at Digitas, which I guess is where the B2C element comes in. And then now you've had, for the past few years, leading roles across two of the UK's biggest B2B agencies. I'm excited to have you on today because at the heart of everything that you do media-wise is that focus on demand generation, account-based marketing with a lens on measurement, tracking and optimization. So it's great to talk to you at any time, but with everyone thinking about 2026 and planning for the year ahead, probably even more useful. So thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be on.
So let's get straight into it. B2B media spend. If I think about my role as a CMO and, having been agency side myself, it has massively changed over the past, I would say, 5 years in terms of how and where we're talking to B2B buyers. But you've been in the thick of it and have been growing with that. So what's your view on how B2B media and demand gen has evolved as we move into next year?
Yeah, I mean, it's constantly evolving, and you often see the sort of pace of that change pick up as well. And from a paid media perspective, you're seeing an increasing number of options and a wider variety of publications and platforms that people use, both for research and just in generally where they exist on the internet. So from a paid media perspective, that kind of shopping list or that list of options is increasing. I mean, what we're seeing more recently is, along with that sort of diversification of online publications, online platforms, is an increase in the buying committee. So generally speaking, pound for pound, the size of that DMU is increasing. And so not only are you seeing an increase in platforms and publications of the sites, but because there are more people involved, of course, those people will have differences in how they browse and where they go. So trying to reach them becomes more complicated and more difficult, but it just means you have to be more conscious of who you're trying to reach and therefore where they're going to be.
Yeah. So it never becomes easier, does it? So more fragmented in terms of the options that we have, and I suppose more niche, which could mean a positive for us. But what you're saying there is as well, like we need to think about the whole decision-making unit as far as our media buying is concerned, whereas 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we might have just said, right, well, we're just going to target, in our case, say, like the CMO or VP of sales. Now there's many more individuals involved in that purchasing decision. So you've really got to make the right choice as far as where you talk to them is concerned. And I suppose that, brings me on to my next question, which was our ICP, so our ideal customer profile. Like, obviously you do a lot of work on that with your customers and the brands that you work with. Does that mean that we need to go even deeper in terms of honing our ICP, not just like okay, it's this type of businesses, but what characteristics do they have? Where would they spend their time? And then also, where do the individuals within those businesses spend their time from an ICP perspective?
Yeah, I mean, one of the sort of benefits, I suppose, is that, you know, as it's become more complex, the tools and technology have improved to allow you to understand the audience and build out the ICP and recognize where they are and how to reach them. So it gives you the ability to set that audience, understand who you're trying to reach, and then how you're going to go to market with them. One of the things that we're finding over recent years is that more of that purchase journey is being conducted anonymously. So people are researching, not necessarily offline, but in ways in which you're not able to identify who they are until a later part of the journey, which makes that kind of top of funnel awareness piece all the more important. Because generally speaking, I think we're looking at around about 80% of that purchase journey these days is done effectively anonymously, whereas before it might have been 50, 60%. So more of that is happening. So, you know, and by the time they're 80% through that purchase journey, they've probably made at least a short list of vendors, if not, you know, getting quite close to a decision. So you want to make sure that you're in front of that audience before that point. So building out the audience and understanding where they're likely to be, even if you can't specifically recognize who they are. So building out ICPs, building out personas is obviously very important so that you can make a very educated guess as to who they are and where they're going to be, so that you're able to serve the right message to those people in environments they're going to be in. And that becomes a really key part of the strategy and approach, and something that you need to be really focused on in the early stages. It's difficult to get right, but with the right tools and with the right approach, you can do that.
Yeah, so thinking about our audience then, and you know, them making choices about how they invest budget, redefining the ICP is absolutely critical. If they've got a version that they need to refine and work on, what kind of data sources should they be using to get that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's varied. I mean, you want to look at, from an audience perspective, if you're using something like demand-based Sixth Sense, you know, build out your audience, then you can get a better idea of who they are. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the company. It depends on the audience trying to reach, but it's difficult to sort of say what might fit, because it depends on the product, it depends on the client, depends on the outcomes you're trying to achieve. So it's varied, and like I said, it's a difficult thing to do, but you need to use that time early on to get that right.
Okay, so you're typically working with clients, looking at all their data sources and then saying, right, okay, what would be the best way for us to amalgamate this data to give us the output of our ICP. So let's go past that point then. So you've identified your audience, and you've probably looked at things like firmographics, industry, turnover, location, and then, you know, potentially the decision makers you're looking to reach. How do you then decide where to engage them?
So, like I said, if you've kind of built up the ICP and the persona, you've got an idea of where they're likely to be. So what we're finding is that you know, what perhaps 10 years ago, for example, a millennial audience might be involved earlier on as a kind of the influence stage, or you know, the kind of pre-selection. But of course, as time moves on, those people are further down the funnel and more at the decision-making stage. So you've got to recognize the browsing habits of that particular audience and where they're likely to be. So I guess the unhelpful answer is that you do need to be quite broad when it comes to recognizing where any whichever persona it is, where there might be is going to be quite broad. So you need to understand that, you know, you'd have to you want to be influencing and reaching them at each stage, but because you don't always know precisely who they are early on, it can be quite tricky to do that. So you're using that audience base to know who they are. And so if you whether you're using something direct like LinkedIn or using programmatic to reach, from an audience perspective, it's about being present where they are rather than where you think they're going to be, and getting that mix right. If you the kind of truism of 95% of your audience are going to be out of market at any one time, right? It's only 5% are in market, but being present for the moment where they are in market is important. But if you're only looking at that, you're probably going to miss out on that shortlist if you're marketing to them at that point. So trying to make sure that you maintain a presence throughout that, for to reach that 95%, so that you are part of the conversation before they get to the decision stage, before they get to before they're in market. You need to ensure that you are there for those moments. So it's looking at that complete picture is really important.
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on a couple of points that you said there. So I think what you're saying is, the reality is, yes, we will know who our ICP is, but we won't know 100% until we start testing where they are. That will mean they will engage with us. And what you're saying is we need to go a bit wider and then get them to self-identify by engaging. Whereas if we say, well, look, everybody who is looking to buy is going to be over here, we limit our ability to reach.
Yeah, I mean, often clients will have an idea of where their audience is going to be, and that's valuable. Industry sites and publications that are specific to their product, of course, but we need to recognize that decision makers, buyers, they're still people who browse the internet. So you don't just want to be present on those key publications. That's still important, but you want to make sure that you maintain a presence where the data tells you they're going to be. The additional layer to that is that you need to align the messaging in the right way, so that people who are researching for work or in work mode are like to be receptive to a certain type of message and ad creative. And those that are browsing, they're still people you want to reach, but they might not be, maybe it's outside of work, or maybe it's lunch hour, whatever it is, but they're still going to be the audience that you want. And so you want to be led by the data so that you are going to be present regardless of where they are, but the message has to be right, because they'll be receptive to a fairly direct, I mean, this is a blunt example, but they'll be receptive to a fairly direct business related message if they are in the right frame of mind. But there's no harm in nudging them towards your brand when they are perhaps outside of business mode, so it's about getting that balance and getting the messaging right, so that you align that with the environment that they're going to be present in.
Yeah. So from my understanding, is what we're saying is, even though we are B2B, we need to be where our buyers are as consumers, as part of the ongoing education process, because that's what helps us capture and even generate the demand where it doesn't exist. Whereas if you are, say, on a specific industry website, someone is there in work mode for a reason. So there's different layers of the funnel where you would adjust creative messaging accordingly.
Exactly. And that's where that kind of close connection between the creative team and media team is really important, because aligning that from the beginning is going to result in much better outcomes ultimately.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's, I think about like, are you saying that as a consumer, if I'm being targeted on a channel that I use as an individual, that message might need to be more simpler but hard hitting to kind of like achieve the same thing, whereas you can go more granular into the detail when they're in business mode.
Yeah, exactly. As one example, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And and obviously there are plenty of other factors that influence this, right? So what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? Obviously, product. Are you looking at prospecting? Are you doing ABM? Like what that obviously makes a big difference. But yes, when you're looking at where you're reaching them, you wouldn't want to align that with the messaging that you're putting out there so that it is landing in the right way.
Yeah. And by thinking, I'm going to like elaborate on this question a bit more, because I think as B2B marketers, we are getting more switched on to the fact that we might have a bit more standout in a digital space where an individual buyer is as a consumer than, say, in the business space. Obviously we think about things like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, etc. What about, have you seen clients leveraging things like Spotify or Audible, or like, is that also becoming part of our ongoing strategy?
Yeah, 100%. And because you can target, if you're looking at audio and you're doing an ad up front, or as part of enroll for a podcast, then that can, if you're again audience specific, but you're reaching the right people with a message that is aligned to what they're doing at that point. It could be business related podcast, but it's probably going to be just whatever it is that particular audience persona listens to or downloads. Spotify, or very, very similar. So you're trying to it's the same point, but they're trying to align what environment they're in with the right message to speak to them at that point, because you want to grab their attention, but you don't want them skipping through the ad, or you want it to land in front of them. So whether it is an audio ad that you want to try and capture their attention, or whether it is a visual ads that then through a site or whatever, it needs to be aligned to the frame of mind that person is in when they're consuming it, so it lands effectively.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And like, I suppose what it does give us the opportunity to do is be more targeted than we ever have before, because you think of all the really niche content that we can consume. There's not just a podcast about sales, there's a podcast about sales in the technology sector or in fintech. Like there's, so if we really wanted to get granular, those kind of, and we can do it both in B2B and B2C type platforms, but that's an opportunity.
Yeah, and without going into the detail, obviously there are platforms that have more effective detail targeting than others. So, if you're looking at a slightly more broad prospecting campaign, that might be a target account list potentially, but it's not specifically ABM, that you have a message aligned to that. Whereas if you are going for ABM, ABX approach, where you want to specifically target an account, the idea obviously is that what that, what the account is. Obviously the audience differs, but you've got the anchor in, okay, what do we know about this particular account, and therefore the prospects within it, so that you can be much more specific. You can know what their install base is. Is there something relevant to that, rather than not just this is how it can serve you and your company, but this is how it can serve you and your company based on your tech stack or your, software or whatever, so it's those really, really tailored.
Yeah. So the fragmentation, gives us the ability to do stuff that's greater. It just makes it a little bit more complex for us. And then, I guess you could approach it two ways. You can go, right, we understand our ICP. Here are the places we know they consume content. Here's the messages that are going to resonate, and start with that wider approach. Or you could add in things like intent data and, more like specific, like very niche firmographic targeting. How are you using those things at the moment with your client base?
Yeah, we always start with outcome. What is the outcome they're trying to achieve? What do we know about the product? What do we know about the sales cycle? The average product cost? Because you can be super targeted. You can segment the audience. You can overlay intent. All those things are super useful. But you also want to be looking at what is an actual effective cost per sales opportunity, because you want to make sure that you're aligned. Because if you're talking about something that's 10 to 20 grand and you are doing all of that and spending a lot on media, it might not be that effective in terms of the cost for the outcome. Whereas if you're talking about something that's 12, 18 month sales cycle because it's a huge purchase decision, 100, 200 grand plus, then absolutely, you can surround that account and even prospects within that account with very specific messaging. You can overlay intent so that you know what they're trying to achieve and what stage of the funnel they're in. All of that, which is super helpful, and it can make the marketing more effective. But again, it's just about getting that balance right, so that you're targeted but broad when it comes to the top of the funnel, and then obviously you're going to get a bit more targeted as you go through, and that you fine tune that audience as you go. So in an early stage, you're going to be speaking to the wider buying committee, and then as you get through to the decision stage, you can switch that. So you don't necessarily, again, case by case basis, but you don't necessarily want to be spending money early on in the journey on just the decision makers, which is often a common request. But you want to be influencing those people that are having the loudest voice at that stage, and that might not always, and in fact often isn't, the decision makers. But then as you get through the funnel, then you can switch that, so you're focusing less on the early stage buying committee, who will have done their bit and handed over their recommendations, and then decision makers who then look at the short list and are making those decisions. It's a basic and blunt example, but you get what I'm saying.
It makes complete sense, because like the stat that you gave us at the beginning of our conversation about, like 90% of our buyers aren't ready and aren't in the market. So if we're going, we've got this great solution, but we only want to talk to CTOs at fintech companies about it, it's like, well, then there's a really big assumption there that those people are ready to buy your solution, because you're just narrowing it and going straight to bottom of the funnel, whereas you haven't done all of that education piece to everyone else who is an influencer in that decision. So it makes complete sense. But I also, thinking about our lead forensics product that we have in demand side platforms, we have exactly the same conversation with clients, in that you've got to go wide, get the client base to show you, or get that prospect base to show you where the demand is, and then go deep. Going deep first is like you're cutting off so much as far as the journey is concerned. And cost, you mentioned CPM, so bang for buck, it's going to be hugely expensive if you go that narrow.
Yeah, exactly that, and that's the point I was gonna make as well, is that this is where measurement and metrics become really important, because it's easy to say or to see that the decision makers convert, those are the ones that convert to pipeline most in the most cost effective way. If you're looking purely on conversion metrics, then sure, that makes sense. But what is often being ignored is all the work that's done before it gets to that point. So you want to make sure you're looking at that complete picture and using the metrics that are relevant to the tactics that you're employing and to the audience at that stage. So when you're looking at the early stage, it's not about how many of those people I'm engaging with are converting, because they're probably not going to convert. But what they are going to do is influence the people that do convert. And so you want to have a relevant metrics that inform performance at each of those stages. Of course, you're building up to the ultimate end goal, which is pipeline revenue or sales opportunities, whatever you're looking at. But you don't want to, like you said, skip to the end and just focus on that, because it will give you an incomplete picture. And sure, if things have been running effectively for a year, 2, 3 years, and then you start looking at, okay, let's try and fine tune our spend so that we are focusing on those most likely to convert. For probably 3, 6, 9 months, that might still work, but eventually you will see that increase in customer acquisition cost. You'll see that tail off in conversion, because you're not getting in front of those people, like you said, the 95% of people that aren't in market. You're ignoring them in order to focus on those that seem like they convert better. But again, you're just you're removing a very important part of the whole journey.
Then so thinking about measurement and what kind of performance KPIs you would put around that other part of it, so many of us are, still working to, last touch attribution models. How are we going to show our organizations that work we're doing is effective and is contributing towards that end conversion of that decision maker?
I mean, the short, it's a short and long answer, but I guess the short answer is, marketing mix modeling is a very good way to do that, but it's a long piece of work. It's not a quick fix. I guess the shorter term, or if you're just looking at from a metric point of view, then as long as you're aligning the metrics with the purpose of that tactic, then it will allow you to see if that's working, then laddering up to the goal. So if you're looking at getting in front of and influencing people early on in the research phase, or just when they're top of funnel effectively, then you're looking at how much of the audience are you reaching? What is the engagement rate? How many are clicking through? Like, so they're, again, basic metrics, but early stage metrics. So the purpose is to make sure you're getting in front of the right people, and that's just about engagement and reach. And then you're looking at, okay, people are starting to do a bit more focus research. So how many of these slightly higher value content pieces they're engaging, like which of in terms of that middle funnel, like how many what of the audience are engaging and with what, and then you start to get to the conversion metrics later on. So not only is it aligning with the stage, but with the persona or ICP segment that you're trying to reach. So because you're starting with that audience and segmentation piece up front, you then want to align the metrics with, okay, what outcomes would tell us that it's successful. Like I said, it obviously ladders up to the following stages, but you want to measure those parts on their own, but for the purpose that they are that they are in place to achieve. So you're not just you're comparing apples to apples and not looking at everything through the same lens.
But I hear you, and there's two parts to it, isn't it? Obviously, it's like, great, they're ICP, and you can use firmographic data to look at businesses who are engaging with you at brand level. But then what that can do is then inform your other activity. So if you start to see particular brands, individuals within particular brands or types of organizations engaging, then you know, right, we need to do more at the bottom of the funnel with these organizations. So it helps you in a lot of ways.
100%. And you have to be flexible with the targeting in flight, because exactly like you said, right? You can, the client will probably have an idea of their ICP you would have worked on with the agency or with, that will have been developed. But you also need to be mindful or be aware of signals you're getting as you go through activation. So yeah, to your point, exactly that. Like what is the market telling us that the audience wants, or who the audience is, because that might change as you go through.
Yeah, makes sense. And we talked about context, didn't we? If they're in a place where they might be as an individual, different messaging. What about things like device? So, if we know we're targeting individuals in a consumer space on mobile, we're going to have to talk to them differently to how we might if we're reaching them on desktop.
Yeah, exactly. Scroll speed is, all those sort of things that will impact that, because you absolutely, again, you need to make sure that what you're reaching them with aligns with the environment and platform, so that it's all combining. And the benefit of having a strategy that goes cross device is that you can reach them in a more impactful way. So if you're geo-targeting, let's say, ABM is a probably good example, right? Perhaps where the headquarters of that business is located. So you geo-target based on that location, so that you know that the people there are likely to be the right audience. But you can also then combine that with digital out of home, or just out of home in general, so that they're getting a consistent message, so that when they're reaching the office, and whether it's via tube or train, whatever, you can have a kind of combined combined tactics that connect the messaging they're getting on their mobile, on their out of home, or whatever it is they're seeing, and then when they get into the office, all those things. Obviously, like, there's that fine line between getting a little bit too creepy. You don't want to over target, but again, it's just getting that balance right.
Yeah, I had I think when we think about digital media, we typically think programmatic, but you mentioned and social, but you mentioned out of home. Are you seeing that become a part of your B2B media strategies ongoing?
Yeah, very much so. And, again, depends on the outcomes you're looking for, of client and tactics, but we see it's useful across the boards, but particularly, we found it quite effective when it comes to ABM, because, like I said, you know where they're going to be. Okay, you can't necessarily make sure it's only that audience, but there's a certain level of trust, I think, that lands more effectively if you're using out of home in the right way. And as long as you don't always have to, but I think it helps then to connect that with the kind of online tactics and mobile desktop that you're using to reach that particular account, or the prospects within that account. So yeah, it can certainly be an extremely valuable part of the mix, again, depending on what you're trying to achieve.
I think you said, like, it's higher, it's ABM, isn't it? Higher order values, there's long sales cycles, it absolutely makes sense to make that investment. And then obviously media advertising, we're going to be creating powerful messages. How do we ensure that those align with what we are saying organically as well in, our owned media?
Communication is always important, right? It depends on, the teams that are involved in those, and that changes from client to client. sometimes you're lucky enough to exist all under one team, but often it's more than one, right? So you just want to make sure that you're communicating across those teams so that the messaging is consistent. It's good to have a look ahead for as far as possible for the full year, whatever it is, so you know what events are coming up, what product launches, and then you know what they're doing or what is being done from a PR perspective, for example, and website changes, so that you know when those things are coming and you can plan accordingly. And having that, what we typically use with most clients is having a sort of burst strategy, so that you might want to have, and probably do want to have, an always on approach that underpins everything, but having that, like having those sort of campaign bursts so that you are supporting the all running concurrently with the organic activity that's being done, whether like I said, events, offline, whatever, so that you're connecting those pieces. So it's not just from a pay perspective, it's from a marketing in general, because you're going to find that the spend for both of those things goes further and has more impact if they're working concurrently and collaboratively.
Yeah. And going back to the measurement piece, it's like we've talked about like the marketing mix modeling and the fact that we're probably going to have to measure engagement over here and then conversion over here. If I am a marketer knowing that I want to do more with my media, I want to be more effective with it, what KPIs should I be tracking across the funnel in 2026?
I mean, it needs to be aligned with the stage, and you fine. What outcome you're trying to achieve. But I think, you're probably always going to be tied to some level of conversion outcome. But if you're looking at like the broader strategy, then looking at engagement and impact is going to be as valuable, because it will inform your optimizations when it comes to what you're doing from a paid media perspective throughout each stage. I think the other thing is that whether you are running an actual ABM strategy or it's to target account list, which again most clients are going to have that, looking at the movement of those accounts again is going to be valuable. How much are they engaging at each stage? What are they engaging with? Looking at the progress they're making, so that you can see not just from a kind of paid media metric point of view, so click through and engagement and impact, but which of those accounts are being moved through the stages based on the activity that you're delivering, that you're putting into market.
Okay, so like you said, it's defining what are my top of the funnel metrics, what are my middle of the funnel metrics, which I guess those are going to be engagement. This might be things like content consumption, website visits, etc., and then bottom of the funnel, conversion, pipeline, all of that stuff that we ultimately need to deliver.
Yeah, and it's probably, it's always been the case that it's not particularly linear, but again, I think something that's changed recently that is becoming even less linear, that you're finding people moving through funnel stages. I mean, there's obviously some argument to say that you maybe need to redefine the funnel, but that's probably a conversation another day. But it might be that the signals suggest that someone is moving towards bottom of the funnel, but then that it might be that they're doing their research, but the project isn't live for another 6 months, or there can be a number of reasons why it might shift from one stage to the next. So again, like, you need to be very conscious of that data and what it's telling you, so that you can ensure that you're not just looking at it from a basic step-by-step approach that, well, they're in the middle of the funnel now, or they're bottom of the funnel. Therefore, let's go all out on conversion, because you might find that they do switch because, like I said, it's not particularly linear these days.
Yeah, yeah. And you might have one individual within that buying unit who's particularly driven, who's taking them into the middle, but everyone else is still very much firmly at the top.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so tools and technologies then to measure this. Is there something that we should be looking at, or are we pulling this together manually? Like what's the best way to get this picture?
Yeah, a $1 million question. I mean, you can definitely have a sort of death by platform, but at the same time, you do need to make sure that you are getting the data that is most useful to you in a way that is usable. So, whether it's like an outsourced dashboard you might use like white label, or you build something yourself, whatever that is, having that set up so it is pulling in that data in a usable format that allows you to see the performance metrics that are most applicable is going to be extremely important. And there's never a one size fits all. There's likely to be multiple sources. All clients have different MarTech stack, and sometimes they have different MarTech stack within regions or business units, so that can be quite complex.
Yeah.
But having something that allows you to pull those data sources into one, so that you can actually see, okay, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and how are our tactics performing to achieve those outcomes?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so different for different organizations. I don't think there is, well, in my experience looking at CRMs and solutions, I've yet to find one that is like the silver bullet for all of that. So if you do, point me in their direction.
I'm working on it. Yeah, I'm hoping to build up the perfect stack, but yeah, I haven't got it yet.
Okay, and hot topic, we're all using it so much as part of our everyday roles now, but how do you see AI and automation influencing our media planning and optimization in 2026?
I mean, from a basic level, it can be a shortcut to get some extremely useful information, right? I mean, it's still something you need to be not wary of, but you need to be fact checking and whatever. But if you are able to build effective prompts, then it can be an incredibly helpful way to assess large amounts of information.
Right, yeah.
It's also, you're seeing it in all sorts of different tools, right? Whether it's, looking at paid search bid strategy, or whether it's looking at, from an audience perspective and trying to assess and determine audience. So there's all sorts of things that it can be an incredibly useful tool for. I think that there's at the moment, obviously lots of trial and error with what works and what doesn't. I think we've found tools that we have seen work well, perhaps from a B2C, but don't quite translate to B2B, and vice versa. So, it's about finding the right fit. But yeah, it's obviously going to have a huge impact. It's just a case of using it in the right way and intelligently. That there needs to be a lot of again, a bit of an obvious point, but a lot of preparatory work that goes into it, so that the outcomes you're getting are the most useful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, do you think there'll ever be a point where we'll have AI agents who are doing our media buying for us based on previous performance?
I mean, probably, yeah. Like it's still, it's a relatively early technology, and it's already pretty impressive. So as it goes on, you're seeing improvements all the time, and the speed of those improvements are just getting quicker and quicker. So it needs to be led quite a bit at the moment, but the likelihood is that is going to improve, and it will become more, just increasingly more automated.
Yeah, makes sense. And to finish off, what are your predictions for the future of B2B media and demand generation as we head into a new year rapidly?
I mean, I think a lot of it tends to be based on market forces and economics. I sort of mentioned at the beginning, but what we're seeing, what we have been seeing in terms of changes is so heavily influenced by economic conditions that I think that's always going to be one of the most have the biggest impact in how things change. So if we see things, from a global economic perspective at least, pick up, then you're likely to see people being a bit braver with what they're doing, be a bit more creative, a bit more adventurous. Whereas if the opposite happens, we'll see, as I said, the increasingly sort of defensive and sort of safe the purchases, and therefore probably safer when it comes to media execution. So that I think is going to have the biggest, will have a large impact. But we're seeing we are seeing, it's definitely a wavy line, but I think we're starting to see things pick up a bit, and it's a bit of a slow impact post COVID, and that I think 21, 22 had a big hit in budgets and what people were doing, but we're sort of seeing that come out of that a little bit. It's slow progress, but it's definitely happening, and with a broadening online scope, then that'll continue, and so. Like I said, reaching people at the right place at the right time is going to be more challenging, but there are tools and stuff to help us with that.
And always exciting because the industry is changing and evolving and hopefully getting better in supporting us to reach our goals. Thank you so much, Stuart, for joining us. I found that really insightful. I know our audience will as well. I'm sure we'll have you on again soon, but best of luck with the rest of the year and 2026.
Great. Thanks so much. It's been great speaking to you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.